of New York pleaded not guilty to 9 criminal charges in Arizona, where he is among more than a dozen Trump associates charged with conspiracy, forgery, and fraud in a plot to overthrow the results of the last election. With all the consequences that come from lying about the last election, why are lawmakers sowing doubt about the next one? We'll have an essay about that. Often in the middle of a big story, there's another story worth exploring. For example, the migrants who died in the Baltimore bridge collapse made us wonder about how big the migrant workforce is that America depends on. Another example, the FBI has warned about infrastructure attacks on water plants. Why are they uniquely vulnerable? We'll have both of those stories. In Gaza, aid deliveries have been halted because of lack of supplies, security, and an abundance of chaos. The Israeli government has seized equipment belonging to the Associated Press, and in Iran, the country's former president is mourned in the streets. And finally, actress Scarlett Johansson has played an accommodating artificial intelligence soulmate and a ruthless assassin who will stop at nothing. OpenAI is accused of copying the voice of the former, and Johansson is responding to them in the voice of the latter. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with Donald Trump's defense attorneys resting their case in the former president's New York criminal trial. Since the trial started on April 15th, the prosecution called 22 witnesses, totaling over 50 hours of testimony. The defense, meanwhile, called 2 witnesses with about 2 hours of testimony. Among those who took the stand were David Pecker, former publisher of the National Enquirer, Hope Hicks, Trump's longtime former White House aide, Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress who allegedly had a sexual encounter with Trump in 2006, and Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, fixer, and ally. These witnesses were able to provide insight into what prosecutors call a criminal scheme to pay Stormy Daniels $130,000 in exchange for her silence about that alleged encounter. The former president has pleaded not guilty to 34 charges of falsifying business records in connection to that payment. For more, let's bring in, as we always do, CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, who has been in the courtroom. Katrina, you've been there for, I guess, all of it. Now that
20 days now.
Yes. Now that they've rested, what do you make of the 2 arguments as they've played out?
I think the prosecution put on a very compelling case, and they put it on in a smart way, too. They started with the big picture you were talking about of the alleged catch-and-kill scheme with Michael Cohen, Donald Trump, and David Pecker from the National Enquirer, and then really took us through the progression of events that led to the payoff of Stormy Daniels and the ultimate cover-up of that payment, corroborating evidence along the way with lots of documents, text messages, emails, audio recordings, call logs, and all of this really progressed up to Michael Cohen. And it also felt important that many of the witnesses they brought on were actually Trump loyalists, establishing this case and giving quite damaging evidence against him. But where the defense really shone was in their cross-examination of Michael Cohen. They showed a lot of inconsistencies in his testimony on the stand and, of course, his history of lying under oath. They even tried to establish that he may have lied on the stand in this case, although the prosecution sort of came back from that in the end. So I think when it comes down to it, a lot of it will depend on whether these 12 jurors believe any of what Michael Cohen said. They don't have to believe all of it, but they do have to believe some of it, and then also how both sides weave all of this together in closing arguments.
Tell me about Bob Costello. What role? Because there was a lot of drama. Help people understand what the drama was about.
So Bob Costello was a legal advisor who was linked to Rudy Giuliani, and Cohen had testified that he tried to become Cohen's lawyer, but Cohen really saw him as a back channel to Donald Trump and felt like anything he told him would end up going to the president, so he wasn't comfortable having him as representation. And when Costello took the stand, he was a really contentious witness. Very early on in his testimony, he was sort of saying geez and sighing because there were all these objections that the judge was sustaining, and the judge first let the jury out of the room.
He's a defense witness.
He's a
Costello.
defense witness,
okay.
Yes, he's a defense witness. And just for context, Judge Merchan is always so composed, so calm. he always keeps order in his courtroom. So when he chastised this witness on the stand for his decorum, it was really striking. And then apparently Costello gave him a glare in response, at which point he just the judge yelled and just cleared the entire room. It was basically chaos as the guards were ushering all of the press out of the room, and he gave him a private talking to. But this is very rare. This does not happen in court a lot for a judge to do this.
Wow. Okay. So as a final question, Donald Trump didn't take the stand.
Yes.
One is not compelled to testify in one's own case. But explain what that may or may not mean, and then also help me understand why the defense would only call 2 witnesses. Might that mean they think, you know what, we took care of it on cross. We've raised the doubt we need to raise. We don't need to bring in a whole bunch of people. I
mean, the truth is the burden of proof is on the prosecution. In this case, the defense almost didn't put on any case. And as you said, they're not, a defendant is not required to take the stand in their own case. And having been in 2 other courtrooms where Donald Trump took the stand, I have to say, he probably was advised well not to do so. In this case, he is not one to stay under control while testifying. And of course, the jury can't hold this against him either.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much. See you for closing arguments.
Thank you.
In an Arizona courtroom, about a dozen people pleaded not guilty Tuesday to charges of conspiring to overturn the 2020 presidential election. An indictment unveiled last month ties 18 people to an alleged fake electors scheme to keep Donald Trump in office, quote, against the will of Arizona voters. President Biden beat Trump in the state by more than 10,000 votes. Trump's former attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was among the defendants arraigned Tuesday. Others include his former campaign lawyer, Jenna Ellis, and the Arizona GOP's former chairwoman, Kelly Ward. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is also charged in this case. He will be arraigned next month. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins me now to explain the players on the racing form here. Major, remind us of why Arizona was so central to the story of the 2020 election and the attempts to overturn President Biden's victory.
John, great to be with you. So Arizona and Georgia represented the 2 states most surprising to former President Trump's reelection campaign in 2020. Trump had won Arizona by 3.5 percentage points, but the final vote totals in 2020 showed him losing it by about 0.3%. That shift not only cost him 11 electoral votes, but suggested that also Georgia was something he was going to lose too. And those 2 states were among the very first in which aggressive efforts were undertaken to overturn the certification in both those states. Arizona is particular in that those efforts were not just procedural and legal. There were lawsuits filed, more than 7 in Arizona, but there are also almost instantaneous efforts to intimidate vote counters in Maricopa County, the state's most populous county, and harass members of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and the Arizona legislature. And those efforts, though they were not successful, did augur or foreshadow a much more aggressive form of election denialism, where violence or threats of violence is part of the conversation that we're still living with now.
Absolutely. It leads me right into my next question, which is there are now 4 states that have similar fake elector cases: Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, and Georgia. At least in the cases of Georgia and Arizona, they involve a lot of the same people. Why is that important? In other words, these aren't just individual events in individual states, though each state is different. Explain the kind of connectivity between these 4 different fake electors operations.
It matters that the same people are involved because they're very high-level people, very close to former President Trump. And what that tells us, John, at least according to the allegations, is that this was not a spontaneous grassroots effort among Americans frustrated by an election result and not fully versed in election law in their state, who were raising what in their minds were legitimate questions about an outcome that was very close. That's not what this is about. The allegations are that this was a concerted effort by people who knew better or had every reason to know better that their legal challenges either were not going to be validated or were based on very thin evidence or no evidence at all in the case of Arizona, who nevertheless conducted persistent efforts to organize people, file false paperwork, to sow confusion, and then try some never-before-argued constitutional theory that because there's confusion, an election result can be overturned. What all 4 of these states, and maybe others are trying to protect is the valid rules in their state so they're followed in the future.
So that point is crucial, the sort of, oh, it's confusing, so we can run any play we want. That's in front of us again. We're less than 8 months away from the election, 8 months away from the election certification process, the same process that brought about this case in Arizona. What's in place now to stop some shenanigans like this from happening?
Well, there's also, well, not also, but there is in place now much greater awareness of this threat. Secretaries of State, county boards of supervisors, everyone who's involved in the election administration space knows that now not only are they scrutinized, but they are hyper-scrutinized. And if they're anticipating in their battleground state a close election, many of them are, you have to have everything aligned and aligned properly. They also know that in this atmosphere of intimidation and threat, you have to have conversations with your sheriff's office or your police department to protect you. And all those preparations are being made. Most importantly, though, the laws still apply. And what states are trying to do is protect their law, because the Constitution, John, as we know, doesn't establish a federal Bureau of Elections. States conduct their elections according to their laws and their procedures. And if you believe in federalism, if you believe that that constitutional construct is good for our country, then you want states to protect their rules and their procedures. And that's what these legal cases are all about.
Major Garrett, it's great. In Washington, really appreciate it, Major. Thank you.
Sure.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Tuesday. Officially, he was there to discuss the White House budget request to Congress, but the conversation went beyond just the numbers. Senators questioned him on the United States' actions related to China, Ukraine, and the war between Israel and Hamas. During Blinken's opening statements, a group of protesters became part of the hearing.
In the Middle East, we're standing with Israel in its efforts to ensure that what happened on October 7th never happens again, as we do everything we can to bring an end to the terrible human suffering in Gaza and prevent the conflict from spreading. The President's FY25 budget.
Funding a genocide in Gaza. There have been 7 mass graves outside of hospitals. This is sick. This is deranged. You are a war criminal. Shame on you.
The White House is formally asking Congress to approve nearly $59 billion for the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, although the budget request is more like a wish list that will be changed in the congressional process. One person was killed and dozens of others were injured Tuesday following severe turbulence on a Singapore Airlines flight from London to Bangkok. Our partners at BBC News report the 73-year-old British man who died is believed to have suffered a heart attack. Singapore Airlines and Boeing have offered condolences to the family. Data from FlightAware shows the plane suddenly dropped from an altitude of 37,000 feet to 31,000 feet in about 5 minutes. Passengers say many people hit their heads on baggage cabins and lights. The National Weather Service has issued a tornado watch throughout the Midwest Tuesday as severe storms stretch from the southern plains to the Ohio Valley. Already a tornado in Iowa toppled at least 3 wind turbines. This video shows one of those turbines with a snapped post and a burst of flames on the ground. For more on the forecast, here's meteorologist Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, severe storms with a multitude of threats in our forecast, from tornadoes to extreme winds that could be hurricane force to huge hail, 4 inches in diameter, size of softballs, and then flooding as well. This is the area we're going to focus on for tomorrow. Really stretches from Texas all the way up toward the Great Lakes here. So places from Buffalo to Cleveland, Pittsburgh to Little Rock and Dallas could be in that threat zone. This could contain some pretty intense storms even in the morning through the Tennessee Valley, extending back through the natural state here. Then watch big individual discrete supercells form across Texas. Those could be huge hailers and tornado makers. A lot of heavy rain through Kentucky, really heavy rain down across the southeast through the day on Wednesday and likely extending into Thursday morning as well. Flooding will be a problem, no question about that. From Paducah back down toward the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and all points in between, rainfall rates could be 1 to 2 inches per hour. Then, of course, there's a lot of heat out there. Temperatures are really climbing here. A lot of places, temperatures into the 80s with a heat index that's likely to climb into the middle 90s. Now, for more in-depth coverage, you can watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. Critically important but often overlooked. Coming up, new figures from the Labor Department tell us how much the economy relies on immigrant workers. Plus, a federal warning about cyber attacks on water plants. We wanted to find out why these systems are so vulnerable. That story ahead. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Iran's state-run media says the body of President Ibrahim Raisi arrived in Tehran Tuesday ahead of several ceremonies honoring the late leader. Earlier, thousands of mourners attended a funeral procession in the holy Shiite Muslim city of Qom. Raisi's body will return to his hometown in eastern Iran Thursday for burial. Raisi, along with Iran's foreign minister and 7 others, were killed over the weekend in a helicopter crash near the Azerbaijan border. The late president was considered to be a potential successor to Iran's supreme leader. The United Nations halted all food distribution in Gaza's southern city of Rafah Tuesday due to a lack of supplies. Over the past 2 days, officials say no aid trucks have entered the Palestinian territory through a U.S.-built pier. The agency's World Food Program says food is also low in central Gaza. And the UN said earlier this month that a full-blown famine was underway in northern Gaza. The agency says the humanitarian situation worsened when Israel broadened its military operations in the territory earlier this month in an attempt to locate Hamas members. Israel says it will return video equipment it seized from the Associated Press Tuesday, following criticism. Authorities accuse the news organization of violating a law that allows Israel to target foreign media it deems a national security threat. It says the AP was providing images of northern Gaza to the Qatar-based channel Al Jazeera, an AP client, in addition to taking the AP's gear Israel also shut down that video feed. The country reversed its decision after journalism groups and the Biden administration condemned the move. Earlier this month, Israel shuttered all Al Jazeera bureaus in Jerusalem. The move has raised questions and concerns about the freedom of the press in the country. As we reported Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency warned that cyber attacks against water utilities are becoming more frequent and more damaging nationwide. The agency is now urging systems to take immediate actions to protect the nation's drinking water. But officials said about 70% of utilities inspected by the EPA over the past year violated standards meant to prevent breaches or other intrusions. CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga has been looking into this story and joins me now for more. Nicole, it's good to be with you. How do these malicious actors target water plants, and why are water plants vulnerable?
Yeah, here's the big question. Why are hackers going after U.S. drinking water? And what is the actual threat here that we're talking about? Cybersecurity. The EPA has an answer, and it's something that cybersecurity experts have been screaming about for years. Now, because water utilities rely on computer software to remotely operate treatment plants and processing and distribution centers, IT protection is actually really key to water utilities, and cyber hygiene is really important. So the EPA right now is shouting at water utilities who have been falling short in big ways, failing to change default passwords, not cutting off access to the system for former employees. And that has real life implications. Interruptions to water treatment and storage, damage to pumps and valves. We've seen that, something we have not seen, but is a big concern. The alteration of chemical levels in water. And just to give you a sense of how under-resourced water utilities are, the American Water Works Association report this year says roughly 1 in 5 small water utilities say they have low to no ability to advance cybersecurity.
So who might be behind this? And is the objective to, or maybe it ranges, is the objective to poison everybody or just create mayhem and chaos while maybe their other branch is off creating some other chaos somewhere else?
Strong emphasis on mayhem and chaos, and I'm glad that you brought it up. 3 big players in this field: China, Iran, and Russia. And earlier this month, the nation's top cybersecurity agency, CISA, called on pro-Russian hacktivists to stop targeting technology safeguarding water systems as a result of U.S. aid to Ukraine. So politically driven, right? Also, late last year, you might have heard of the Cyber Avengers. They're an Iranian-linked group that targeted a water utility in Pennsylvania. They were going after Israeli technology at that utility as a response to the Israel-Hamas war. You've also probably heard of Volt Typhoon. FBI Director Christopher Wray always talks about the FBI's moves to take that Chinese-linked group down, and they have been living within U.S. critical infrastructure.
So what do they do? So if the water systems are under-resourced, can't do it, what's the federal government trying to do, or any other actor trying to keep this from happening?
Yeah, last March, over a year ago, the EPA put into effect a new rule requiring states to audit cybersecurity for their water utilities. And guess what happened? 3 states and 2 trade groups sued, accusing the EPA of overstepping their authority there. Arkansas, Missouri, and Iowa. Now, this EPA bulletin doesn't have many teeth to it, but it's meant to send a message, much like a letter from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to governors earlier this year. Part of the challenge, John, is that water utilities are not owned and operated by the federal government, right? Public water systems are usually nonprofits that are, led and managed by local or state governments. So how do you regulate them? Well, Congress does have some ideas. And as recently as last week, House lawmakers introduced a new bill that would establish something new, the Water Risk and Resilience Organization, a new governing body that would oversee cyber regulations to water utilities and wastewater systems. We will see how that fares on Capitol Hill.
Right. And a story worth following. Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was great. Elvis Presley's granddaughter is fighting to keep his Graceland estate in the family after a lending company tried to sell the Tennessee property. Riley Keough filed a lawsuit to block an auction scheduled for this week. She says the firm made fraudulent claims that the Memphis mansion was put up as collateral to secure a $3.8 million loan her mother, Lisa Marie, took out in 2018. She also says documents the company provided were fake. A hearing on the matter will be held Wednesday. 60 years ago, Paul McCartney famously sang, "I don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love." Well, as of Friday, the Beatle is the first musician in the UK to reach billionaire status. "Can't Buy Me Love" was the first Beatles song to feature only one singer. Paul co-signed it with John Lennon, even though the late rock star told reporters it was completely Paul's song. The Wings frontman, McCartney, can now co-sign his billionaire status to another famous artist, Beyoncé. The American superstar covered the Beatles' hit Blackbird on her latest album, helping push McCartney and his wife past the $1 billion mark. Sir Paul McCartney was also officially recognized in the Sunday Times annual Rich List Friday, in which, as chess masters would put it, the knight takes king. McCartney, the knight, was ranked 165th, far surpassing the king, Charles, whose family has also experienced the mismatch between wealth and love. The king came in at 258th. If prices are going to come down, it's going to require big companies to get into a race to lower them. Coming up, the pros and cons of Target's new plan to cut prices on thousands of household items. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to The Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Both sides of former President Trump's New York criminal trial have rested their cases, lining up jury deliberations to start next week. After closing arguments, Trump ultimately did not take the stand. After weeks of hinting at doing so, both sides will present those closing arguments next Tuesday. At least 12 Trump allies were arraigned in Arizona Tuesday on charges related to the alleged fake elector scheme, including the former Arizona Republican Party chair. Trump's allies are accused of scheming to put up alternate electors when lawmakers met to count electoral college votes in 2021 after Trump lost the state. Sudden severe turbulence on board a Singapore Airlines flight left one man dead and several other people critically injured. Data from FlightAware shows the plane from London to Singapore dropped about 6,000 feet in just 5 minutes. BBC News reports the man who died had suffered a heart attack. When a cargo ship struck Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge in March, of course, there were economic repercussions, but 6 men died in the bridge's collapse, and they were migrant workers originally from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico. Last week, a drunk driver crashed into a bus carrying 53 migrant farm workers in Florida. 8 people were killed. Both incidents serve as a reminder that our country relies on workers from abroad. According to the Labor Department, foreign-born workers account for 18.6% of the American workforce. That was last year. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins me now from San Antonio. Camilo, how much of the foreign-born population is undocumented versus here legally, and how many of them are working age?
Good evening, John. In 2022, the foreign-born population here in the U.S. stood at over 46 million. That's roughly 14% of the overall U.S. population here, according to the Census Bureau. And 77%, or 3/4 of that foreign-born population, is working age between the ages of 18 and 64. Within this group, there are nearly 11 million immigrants living in the country illegally or as undocumented immigrants. That's according to another report published by the Department of Homeland Security, which found that most of those unauthorized or undocumented immigrants are also working age. So as you underscored, immigrants, those who are here legally and also illegally, are a key part of the American labor force. And the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has also found, John, importantly, that immigration has indeed been a key driver of economic growth and output post-pandemic, and it has helped the U.S. recover from the pandemic at a higher level than other countries across the world.
So in generating that economic activity, what kinds of industries are relying on this immigrant labor?
Well, immigrants who are here in the U.S. legally and illegally are more likely than their native-born counterparts to work in service jobs, in restaurants, hotels, hospitality, and other jobs like retail. They're also more likely than native workers to work in maintenance and construction jobs, and they're also likely to work in production and agricultural jobs. And that is obviously something that is as old as the American story. For decades and centuries, as you know, John, immigrants have been doing physically demanding, essential, and often low-wage jobs. And we can go back to the 19th century when the Chinese immigrants built the railroads in the West. We can go back to the early 20th century when the Irish and Italian immigrants built many of the cities on the East Coast. And obviously to the present day when many Latin American immigrants and others from across the world are doing key jobs in construction, restaurants, hotels, and obviously agriculture. And that trend, I think, will continue for the foreseeable future.
Somebody who wants to stop that trend is Donald Trump, who's running on a platform of mass deportation. Setting aside for a moment the legal questions that would engage, give us some sense of the economic repercussions if there were to be an effort at intentional mass deportation. How would it affect this workforce we've been talking about?
Well, first of all, John, it is unclear whether this promise to carry out the largest deportation operation in U.S. history is actually feasible. ICE only has 8,000 employees in its deportation branch. The highest number of annual deportations that the agency has carried out was 400,000 in 2012. And so the agency does not have the resources or the manpower to carry out millions of deportations within 4 years, let alone in 1 year. So that's the operational hurdle that any such plan would face. But yes, I mean, any mass deportation operation would be disruptive to the U.S. economy, because whether we agree with the fact that immigrants are here illegally or not, many of them are working in very essential jobs. And while immigration restriction is, John would argue that deporting immigrants would open jobs to native-born Americans and potentially illegal immigrants, I'm not quite sure that American citizens and legal immigrants, for that matter, would do all of the jobs that undocumented workers are currently doing, which again are backbreaking, tend to be essential, and low wage.
Camila Montoya Galvez in San Antonio. Thanks, Camila. Russia says it's started military drills involving tactical nuclear weapons near its border with Ukraine. These weapons target a specific area without causing widespread radioactive fallout. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the drills earlier this month. The Kremlin calls the exercises a response to militant statements by Western officials like French President Emmanuel Macron, refusing to rule out sending troops to Ukraine, and a UK official who claimed Ukraine could strike inside Russia with British weapons. On the other side of the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling on NATO and Western allies to do more to protect Ukraine. In a recent interview with the New York Times, he was quoted as saying, "What's the problem? Why can't we shoot them down?" when asked about intercepting Russian offensive missiles. Zelensky went on to argue that destroying the missiles before they hit and arming Ukrainian forces on the border are defensive actions. He also accused some Western leaders of being slow to aid Ukraine due to diplomatic and trade relationships with Russia. Target is cutting prices on more than 5,000 items this summer. The retailer is looking to boost sales and remain competitive as more consumers seek out discounts and change shopping habits because of inflation. Prices for household items like milk, bagels, diapers, even pet food are dropping. But there are concerns the move could hurt small businesses struggling to compete with larger chains on price. Mark Cohen joins me now to discuss. He's the director of retail studies and an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Thank you so much for joining us. What does Target's decision to cut prices on this large scale say about the current state of the economy and consumer spending habits?
COVID is abated, but the aftermath of COVID is the consequential inflation that we've been facing, that we haven't seen to this degree in the United States since the late 70s and the early 80s. And though retailers like Target, rather like Walmart, Amazon, and Costco, saw their business boom during COVID and after COVID, that was largely driven by their ability to sell grocery and essential items, and their focus on reining in costs. The problem Target has faced is they've been left out of the party. They're seen by many of their consumers as becoming expensive. And while in COVID, the consumer was focused primarily on the supply of merchandise, today consumers are necessarily focused on pricing. And so the action that Target has just announced is an attempt on their part to get back in the game, to become more relevant, to reverse the trend that they've seen in the past year, which has been a shortfall in traffic to their stores and their website and declining sales.
Is it possible to know, and probably it's not in these early days, but whether they're making a bet, essentially lower prices, get in more traffic. How much more traffic are they going to have to get to make this pay off?
Well, they don't operate in a vacuum. And so as Target has announced lowering thousands of items in price, their competition, notably, for example, Walmart, Amazon, and Costco, are not sitting on their hands. And so this is a bit of a foot race to outpace the lingering effect of inflation, which, of course, affects retailers by virtue of the price they pay for the merchandise they sell and all of their costs, their rent and occupancy costs, their energy costs, and, of course, their labor costs. And so the bet is, by lowering prices, demand will come back, and there'll be enough gross margin dollars as a result to make sense of this kind of an effort. I think Target is a little late to the party here, and the question is whether this is enough of a decision and whether or not it's too late.
That race to cut prices might sound great to people's ears, anybody who wants to see everybody competing on price to keep them driving lower, but would that have an effect on those smaller stores that don't have that kind of flexibility that a larger store might have?
This is undoubtedly an unfair issue, if you will. Smaller stores do not have the scale typically or the wherewithal to lower their gross margins for the sake of boosting volume. But the unhappiness of it all is that prices, generally speaking, don't decline post-inflation. They simply stop rising, with the exception of some commodity goods like eggs and butter and gasoline and diesel. And so we're in for a couple of years of remediation. If you look back toward the early 80s when this was last upon us, and it's anybody's guess how this is going to turn out.
Mark Cohen from the Columbia Business School, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up after the break, what's in a voice? OpenAI is in hot water with one Hollywood actress who claims the company stole her voice for its latest project. We'll look at the state of artificial intelligence and what it means to have your voice used by an assistant. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
It's the clock. It's ticking. Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Hello, this next story you are about to hear is about artificial intelligence. If you wonder why my mouth isn't moving, that's because the voice you're hearing is a clone of the voice you've come to know and love. This is what a voice clone sounds like. Now, over to you, John, to explain why we started this piece with a voice clone. What you heard was just me, sort of. It was an AI-generated audio clip we created using my voice. We created it. That's the operative expression. Actress Scarlett Johansson says the company OpenAI used an AI-generated voice that sounds eerily similar to hers without asking her, and she wants them to stop it right now. The company recently unveiled its latest AI model, GPT-4o, last week, featuring an audio interacting persona named Sky. Johansson says the company developed the voice without her permission after she declined to offer to provide her actual voice. OpenAI denies this. For context, the voice sounds similar to her appearance in the movie Her, where Johansson voices an artificially intelligent virtual assistant. Here's Sky in action.
Hey, ChatGPT, I'm Mark. How are you?
Oh, Mark. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Joseph Lawler joins me now. He is an intellectual property attorney for Haynes & Boone, LLP. So, SAG-AFTRA, the actors union, backed Johansson after she raised concerns. They struck last year, as we all know, during the actor and writer strike, to fight AI's use in the movie industry. What is the state of AI right now in creative industries?
So AI can be a powerful tool and it can help creators. As you just mentioned, and we even saw this in the writers' strike, that writers secured important protections to ensure that they'll be the ones writing scripts and can use AI as an aid, but the studio bosses can't replace the writers with AI. Actors and musicians have those same concerns. Another front in that battle is how those AI technologies are learning. It's called training the AI. You have to feed data into the AI. And some content creators, including the New York Times, are actually suing OpenAI. And their legal theory is that the AI tool is improperly training on the content created and owned by the Times and other publications.
So in this Johansson case, how would one go about adjudicating this? In other words, when is does a person's voice stop being a person's voice? And I would imagine it also has to do with whether that person is sufficiently famous or not. Joe from down on the corner's voice maybe being not as protected as Scarlett Johansson's.
That's right. Yeah. Joe from Brooklyn, like myself, probably not protectable, but a celebrity like Scarlett Johansson is. And there's really two legal theories. One is right of publicity law. You might have heard of NIL in the college sports landscape talked about recently. In many states, right of publicity protects not only your name, image, and likeness, but also your voice. And celebrities, when a voice imitation is evocative of that celebrity, might have a cause of action for right of publicity. There's also a false endorsement theory. So by using a voice that sounds like Scarlett Johansson, consumers might be misled to believe that she's actually endorsing the product, here, ChatGPT 4.0. So there are a couple legal theories that might be viable for Scarlett Johansson to enforce her rights to be the only person to commercially exploit the use of her voice.
But in determining it, whether it's her voice or not, who makes that determination? Is that a judge, jury, or does this get settled out of court and you know it when you see it?
It kind of is one of those subjective, you know it when you see it or you know it when you hear it cases. But it would be a jury ultimately. A judge would have an initial say to see if it was similar enough to even pass the sniff test. Here, it probably seems like it would. But look, there's clearly PR concerns here, and I doubt this is a battle that OpenAI would want to fight publicly in court, as opposed to trying to settle this dispute privately with Scarlett Johansson.
That's such a great point, because OpenAI is everybody's watching them to make sure they stay on the right side of the line on 1,000 different questions. So bad idea to get on the wrong side of it in a highly publicized case. Final question, quickly: what happens in a world where let's say you license your voice and then everybody's using it for whatever they want to do on their web browser and everything else? Does that change the value proposition of your voice then when it goes out in other instances? You're no longer the dulcet tones of Fred. You're just the voice everybody hears all the time.
I think that's right. And, the whole idea of right of publicity is that an individual, so in this example, Scarlett Johansson, should have the right to exploit commercially their voice or their image as they see fit. So if you were to license, for example, your voice to be used widely across the web, you should be able to do that. And the scope of that license will really determine your rights moving forward.
Joseph Lawler, thank you. This was really fun. Thanks for helping us understand it.
Thank you.
Still to come, an election is supposed to end with a black and white answer, who won and who didn't. But in a nation divided by misinformation and radical theories, some refuse to accept the results. We'll explore what happens when lawmakers don't commit about the future. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
As a general rule, priests should not raise doubts about the existence of God. Newly married people should not promote adultery. Lung doctors should not be vague about chain smoking. This principle extends to lawmakers whose authority comes from the trust placed in them by the democratic process that elected them. As stewards of our democratic system, lawmakers should not raise questions about elections without strong evidence. But in Donald Trump's Republican Party, when lawmakers are asked the simple question of whether they'll accept the outcome of the 2024 election, they engage in great pretzel-making answers. Those trying out for vice president duck the question entirely. Senator Tim Scott, J.D. Vance, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, and most recently Senator Marco Rubio have all shilly-shallied around answering the question directly. Sowing doubt is what Donald Trump did before the last two presidential elections. There were no legitimate grounds, but raising questions sets the stage in case you lose. When you do, you can point to your earlier unfounded claim as proof the fraud happened, even though in the past and the present, you have no evidence for your claim. This itself is a fraud that seeks to overthrow the millions of voters who picked your opponent, similar to the fraud Donald Trump promotes that the last presidential election was stolen. That is a lie. There are systems in place to find fraud. No one is suggesting doing away with those systems or ignoring legitimate claims. But a lawmaker who cares about the system more than themselves knows that unfounded claims of fraud can be dangerous. It can lead to violence. They were in the building when it happened on January 6th. So for anyone who has taken an oath to protect the system, the answer when they are asked about the 2024 election should be easy. I will support the outcome, but if there are questions, I will fight to have them addressed through established means, just as I will fight hard against anyone who would incite unfounded doubt about the outcome. A person of character recognizes the obligations to their oath above their personal needs or party desires. That's why we have oaths in the first place. They are a promise. A lawmaker who uses their stature, founded on the trust of taking an oath, to undermine the system that relies on that oath is no mere hypocrite, but an active participant in the destruction of the system they were elected to protect. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The prosecution and defense both rest in Donald Trump's criminal trial, without the former president taking the stand himself. What's next? Plus, a number of Trump's allies have been arraigned in an election interference case in Arizona. We'll take a look at what's being done to prevent similar actions ahead of this year's election. And cyber attacks on the nation's water system are becoming more frequent. What makes the infrastructure so vulnerable? You're streaming The Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying